So about a week ago, I released my first ever Android app. This is Mimir. If you're not familiar with Mimir, allow me to show you. So Mimir is a ROM toolkit. It works on your AY and Thor, your AY and Odin. It should work on any other Android-based retro device. However, those are the only two I've got to test it on. So if you have got a Retroid or any of those others, please do give it a test and let me know how you get on. So what features does it have? So before we talk about the brand new feature, I just want to reiterate for those who haven't seen what it currently does. First, we have our ROM Zipper. What this will do is if you have your ROMs, for example, if you've got Game Boy Advance files, Atari files, whatever classic systems that RetroArch would use, what this will do is it will loop through your entire ROMs folder and compress them into zip archives, which obviously if you've got thousands of games, then you'll notice some substantial savings, but every little helps. Next up, we have our ROM Organiser. So if you're like myself and you're a huge fan of the PS1 and you love your Final Fantasies and your Metal Gears, it's a little bit annoying trying to handle the multiple disks. So if you head into this ROM Organiser, you can select your ROMs folder, and what it'll do is you can use ESDE or other, and other will just create a standard playlist file and it will organise your multi-disc ROMs into a game-specific folder. For ESDE, it does the same thing, only it calls the folder name something different that's compatible with ESDE. Then we have our Vita shortcuts. So if you are a user of the PlayStation Vita or Vita 3K, if you use a front end, then what you can do is you can select your Vita folder. So I actually don't have one, so I'm going to make one. And then in here, what we can do is, if you're using some front ends, you want to use PS Vita. If you're using Cocoon, you'll want to make sure you're using DPT, possibly Digishow as well. Haven't tested it on that. But basically all you need to do is if you search for the game you have, for example, if you have Persona 4, if you spell it correctly, you'll be able to see all the different possible IDs. Then all you need to do is make sure you get the matching ID that matches your copy that you've got, and then you can just press quick add, and this will drop a shortcut file into that selected folder, and then when you get your front end to do a rescan, you'll be able to select it from there and it'll boot straight into Vita 3K. Now onto the main event of this video. So after popular demand, I've added a CHD converter. This is another way to convert your ROMs to save tons of space, only this one is much more substantial. So you can see there it does Dreamcast, PS1, PS2, Sega CD, Saturn and PSP. So the way this works, if I just show you as a demonstration, if I head over to my file explorer, I have got Crash Team Racing, I've got the bin and Q file, which is a CD rip. So if I just select both of those, I'm going to pop those over to my PlayStation 1 folder. You can see I've got the files in there. So everyone remember 578 meg. And what we're going to do is we're going to use my CHD converter to compress these into a single file and reduce the file size. So everyone remember 578. So back over in Mimir, we'll select our ROMs folder. We'll use that one. And then we're going to select our system settings. Now, by default, CHD Man, which is the converter that I'm using, has two functionalities. Firstly, there is Create CD, and there is also Create DVD. I'll explain the difference shortly. Most of these will use Create CD, nothing to worry about. However, if you use PS2, you get this little pop-up that makes you pick your conversion type. So if you take note of the little note I've added here, if you're using Nether SX2, use CD. If you're using ARM SX2, use DVD. Reason for this is Nether SX2 isn't compatible with the DVD style ones because this came out after Nether SX2 stopped development, or stopped active development, I should say. So just a little note on that. And PSP is DVD by default just because it's preferred, but PPSSPP should be compatible. But all we're concerned about is PS1. So we're going to select PS1, we're going to scan. It's going to loop through and it's going to look for any PS1 related folders, whether that's PSX, PS1, PlayStation 1, and then you can see there it's found one image. So it's found my Crash Team Racing, and then if you've got multiple and you only want to convert a couple, you can just tap this and you can deselect it. It will only convert the ones you've selected. And then once you're happy, you press convert. Now, I advise not deleting the original files to start with unless you're very, very confident in my coding ability, so I wouldn't trust myself. So if you're feeling brave, you can delete the original files, but I always advise, at least for the first couple of times you do this, is leave the original files, check that the CHD is converted correctly, and then if you're happy, then you can delete the original files. So I'm not going to do that, and then once you're happy, just start conversions. So you'll see here, you're going to get this little progress bar, it's going to race through. If you've got multiple, you can either stop it immediately, which will leave you with half a file, which you don't want. I've also added stop after current conversion, and what this will do is it will finish the current job, and then if you've got some queued up, it will just stop. Also, if you, there we go, it's converted already, so that took 15, 20 seconds or so. PS2, PSP, they will take a little bit longer, but you can do them in batches, you can do a couple of times, that is entirely up to you. One thing to note as well is if I back out and I do a scan, so if we do a rescan, because I've already got a CHD file for Crash Team Racing, it's gonna flag up, and by default it will be deselected. If you want to overwrite that, for example, if there's been an issue with a file, then all you need to do, tick that button, and then you'll get this little pop-up to replace the CHD. And then when you convert it, it will just overwrite the existing one. But it will flag if it already exists. And just finally, before we wrap up, if I head over to my File Explorer, you can see there's our original bin and queue files. So we've got 578 megabytes. That has been compressed down into 303 megabytes. So a saving of 275, I think. Something around those lines. So that is Mimir, and I'm very, very proud of what it's been able to do so far. I'm very proud of the reception it's had. It's been a nice exercise to not only learn Android development, but also to hone my coding skills, especially when it comes to things like importing third-party libraries like I've done with CHD Converter. I also want to say an absolutely huge shout out to Russ from Retro Game Core for featuring this in his newsletter. I dropped him an email a few days ago and said, like, hey man, check this out, and he replied saying, yeah man, I want to do it. Not in those words, but I really appreciate that, so thanks to him. If you've got any requests that you think this app would benefit from, then feel free to drop a comment below, or you can raise something on GitHub. Again, if you get any bugs or things like that, that's what the GitHub page is for. There's also my Discord, which will be linked below. So have a play around, let me know what you think.